Quick context for this conversation. Shivakumar, or Shiv as he's well known, is Group Executive President at Aditya Birla Group, and he has a reputation for being a very voracious reader. And every year he puts together his picks of the best books on business and leadership published during the year. And this conversation is a special one because it marks a landmark. Really, it's the fifth consecutive year that Shiv has done this on Founding Fuel, and his current recommendations are the lead story. And thank you, Shiv, for putting this together. It really means much to us. And over the
Anytime
last,
for you and IG. Yeah, anytime, guys.
hey, come on, thanks so much, Shiv. And the last 3 years after Shiv's recommendations are done with, we get into a conversation with him on his choices. But like I said, because this is a special one, we thought of adding some extra zing to it, and that's why we thought of Aparna Piramal Raje and T.N. Hari here as well. And now Aparna has a formidable reputation as a public speaker and a mental health advocate, and her book Chemical Khichdi hit the shelves earlier in March this year. And it's an absolute must read. And I got everyone at home as well to read the book, and we were exchanging messages earlier this week. And Aparna shared that she has picked up some nuggets and learnings basis her research and conversations that she would like to share, and perhaps ask Shiv a few questions as well. So, Aparna, thank you so much for taking time out with us this evening. Really glad to have you.
Thank you for having
Aparna,
me.
he said I'm a boring guy. He said Aparna is interesting. So let's have her on the program. That's the real reason. Okay. So they couldn't suffer me anymore. Fifth year. Like IPL now, they're
I
easing
find
me
that
out.
I find that very hard to believe.
No, but we've got another really interesting person. It's just T. N. Hari, who's co-founder at Artha School of Entrepreneurship, and he's co-author of Winning Middle India with Bala Srinivasa. And this book hit the shelves a few weeks ago. And now between Hari and Bala, they know a few things about Middle India, and I'm among the privileged ones who got a signed copy of the book. And that aside, Hari has a reputation for being a contrarian. So I'm sure there is much Hari will have to share and talk about as well. So before we uh, dive into this conversation, for those of you who have logged in so far, I can see now not too many people have logged in, and I guess let's see as this conversation progresses. Raise your hand, and Ram will get you on stage. Shiv, let me just begin with you. Your top 10 picks. Uh, is there a narrative that binds these books? So I can see there's only one biography of Rahul Bajaj that makes it to your list.
Yeah.
Last year there were two, and when I look at your earlier lists, I see a clear inclination for biographies. Is it because you didn't find any other interesting ones, or were you compelled to leave biographies out as a genre?
No, I like this the best. I thought it was a really good book. The day I bought it, I finished reading it, which is the book by Geeta Piramal and Rahul Bajaj. But to your question on the trend, as I looked at the last year, one of the things which came to the front was rethinking strategy for companies, rethinking leadership, and rethinking work. So that has dominated my list because each person will have his or her own list, okay, which is only fair because we have our favorites in terms of themes. So that's what's dominated my list if you look at it. So Rahul Bajaj is it's a great story about a great industrialist. A new way to think is about rethinking strategy. The Earned Life is Marshall Goldsmith, a good friend, great stuff. Love and Work in terms of Marcus Buckingham is about what are you going to do about work you don't love and work you love, and people who fall in love with the work they do are the ones who succeed. CEO Excellence is a McKinsey book. After having studied many CEOs, they have in typical consulting fashion, they have a few nuggets there. Then there's a Culture Code. Building products and building your team and building yourself is Tony Fadell, ex Apple. I thought Henry Kissinger was one of the best books I've read. He's 99 years old. He's got a fabulous memory. He's written a brilliant book on six people who have impacted the world over the last 100 years. I would recommend it to anybody. It's a drop dead fantastic book. A look at the world through through a lens of what was happening then. and finally the nowhere office, and then the crux. So my whole focus has been strategy and how strategy is changing in a fast changing world. How is culture changing? What is this whole concept of work from home, work from anywhere? Because I personally believe the great resignation, the great quitting, all that is over this month in my book. With 120,000 or more layoffs in America, many layoffs in India in the edtech sector, already 40, the pendulum has swung the other way. Today, it is the company's market. It is not the candidate's market anymore. I think all these will come back to the fore in the next few months. So that's what I'd say.
So, Shiv, if I may to just stay with you on that for a moment, when I go over the lists over the last 5 years that you've been doing this, and since you spoke about the trend, um, I just got the feeling, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. I just got the feeling that the recommendations this year that you make compel the reader to look inward as opposed to outside. Henry Kissinger, I thought, was one of those which, where you look outside. But Marshall Goldsmith, for instance, is you look inward. Um, has something shifted fundamentally?
Yeah, I think that's a very good observation. It's absolutely right. I didn't think about it like that. You're absolutely right. One of the things in the pandemic over the last 2 years, every individual has thought for himself and his family to say who has supported me, who has not supported me, what am I doing with my life, etc. And that's why you see a spate of books in that genre. The other thing is companies have to had to rethink, go back to their roots and say what the hell is happening with our strategy, because strategy and tactics flow into each other very seamlessly in today's world. So yes, I think the last at least 12 18 months has made people reflect a lot more than ever before. I would agree to that. Yeah, that's a valid observation.
Okay, okay. Aparna, let me just come to you. The moment you saw the list, your first reaction was that, the book which is there on Rahul Bajaj, you said that it may perhaps not be kosher for you to speak about it because it is by your mom, Geeta Piramal, but I think all of us in this room are okay with it because there's no self promotion or anything out here.
And more important, I
Um,
have recommended the book, so
and
that's
more
fine.
importantly, exactly, Shiv has recommended it. And since we are on the genre of biographies, really, you have seen firsthand what it takes to write a biography. You're a writer yourself, but you've seen from close quarters what does it take to write a biography. And Rahul Bajaj himself is quite a character, a phenomenal character. But we don't see too many good biographies that have emerged out of India. Any reasons? What are your observations, thoughts that come to you?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks, Shiv, for having including the book in your list, and I will happily take any credit on behalf of my mother for this book. So I am not
It's a
going to shy
fantastic book.
away
I
from
liked it a lot.
any of
Yeah.
that. Yeah. The thing that is about biography, that what I've seen is that you can actually approach biography in many ways, right? You can look at it from a book on management, or a book on leadership, or really a book on history and business history. And I think what Rahul Bajaj is, I think the lens that my mother has really taken is to look at a very kind of business history perspective of his life, to have a very comprehensive factual history of this life, and in a way tell the story of India also, and what India has gone through over the last so many decades, through this person's life. So I think that I think I've also thought a lot about biography, and what I've really seen is that the people who write biographies, they have to somehow master the skill of becoming the subject and really identifying with their thoughts and their emotions, and how they respond to situations, but then also develop a certain sense of detachment from that, to have the ability to really immerse yourself in the subject, and then also step back and then examine that person with a more critical lens. So I don't know if we have really the space to have that conversation even within the regular media, which would kind of be the starting point of that. For example, we don't have obituaries really, in any of our mainstream media, unless it's somebody very famous who passes away. Then we have a story on them. But as a regular practice, we don't have these kind of the stories happening so much. So I don't think we've developed that sense of immersion and detachment, which I think is quite critical to making a biography happen. And then also, as I said, deciding whether this Rahul Bajaj's book could have been written as a management book or as a leadership book, or as my mother chose to take a call, as a business history book. So there are different ways to approach that. But I think also this year there have been some biographies. If you look at the I think Gaja Capital Prize, they've shortlisted quite a few of them. There have been autobiographies or biographies, several of them. Now you could then take a call about whether you feel that they're up to the mark, and maybe Shiv has read some of them and can share
Yeah.
that.
So I'll
Yeah.
say, Aparna, I'm a great one for biographies. I'm just reading something from Michelle Obama, not a biography, but a book on her in terms of the weight we carry. See, in this book, what I really liked about Rahul Bajaj's book was one, it told India's history, number one. Okay, from his dad, who was a three-time you know MP from Varda. It told the story of India and the challenges of capacity utilization, new technology, etc. And I think more important, the different paths that he chose. Going to Stephens, going to Harvard, marrying somebody outside his clan. They were all very well documented and very well researched and very well put across. And it's not a run of the mill book at all. And I personally thought that Mrs. Piramal had got struck the right balance. When I actually did the summary of the book, and I sent it to Aparna also, the book summary, I looked at a lot of the reviews at that point of time. There was one by Forbes, Naushad Forbes, saying, I think she could have made this into two books. I think that would have been boring, in my opinion. And second, there was a lighter side to Bajaj, which could have come out, etc. I think she has celebrated him in the exact manner. The challenge with Indian biographies is that people go gaga and they build a superhero or a superwoman, which is completely wrong. And I agree with Aparna that we don't keep balance. And that's what I liked about the book. What Geeta Perumal did was to give us a balance about Rahul Bajaj and India.
Right.
Yeah, well, I will definitely convey that to her, Shiv. She'll be very
Thanks.
pleased with that. Yeah.
Hari, you've been listening in, and the while on the theme of while on the genre that is biographies, you're the contrarian in the room, as we all know you. And what googly are you going to bowl at us when it comes to biographies? What is it that you think we should have looked at but missed?
Well,
Or are you a fan of biographies at
so
all?
not particularly, Charles. I mean, I have read a few biographies, but I'm not particularly a big fan of biographies in general.
Okay.
So I'm not as well read as either Shiv or Aparna. I think I'm not a voracious reader. For me, books are just one of the many ways in which I consume content, knowledge, and figure out new things. And writing for me is equally fun as well. And so, for example, some of my books, my favorite books, before I come to my favorite books, for instance, I sometimes end up reading a book that I've read multiple times before. Sometimes I read parts of a book that I thoroughly enjoyed, some insights that I picked up but didn't completely understand the first time. I read them again. So my thing is not about book count. I don't believe in, 2022, I have to read 20 books, identify 10 best. That's not me at all. So I just read for fun, I write for fun, and I have a wide range of interests. For instance, leadership is something I absolutely detest. I don't read any books on leadership. I'll just come to that in a moment why. For instance, my favorite books this year, which I read and probably some of which I reread, was, for example, Hidden Brain by Shankar Vedantam. It's a bit like, Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. I loved Rupa Pai's Cubbon Park. I was always interested in the history of Bangalore, the British connection. And I was looking for a good book when I happened to accidentally meet Arun and Rupa sometime in Cubbon Park. They took us for a walk, and then I read her book. It was a lovely, story of the history of Bangalore, right from Kempegowda to British days. I love Pranay Lal's books. Pranay Lal is an amazing author. He's written two books, Indica and The Virus. I ended up reading Jack London's selected short stories. I read my colleague Deblina Majumdar's two wonderful books, Trial of the Maharaja, which is a story of a niche part of Bengal history during the Warren Hastings period. This is about Nanda Kumar, who was, tried and hanged eventually. I loved the other book as well, which is Sabu, which is a story of the elephant boy from the stables of Mysore, who went on to become a Hollywood star. I read B.V. Raju's, biography in a way, which is Karma Yogi. I read Gary Kasparov's, Deep Thinking. I love the Maratha Century by Uday Kulkarni, for example. I'm just reading Forks in the Road, which is by C. Rangarajan. So, if you notice, then I love history, I love science, I love, books which talk about some wonderful trends, human psychology, human mind. And I believe you can't understand these topics well enough without reading books. And reasons why I don't read a single book on leadership is for three reasons. One thing, anyway, you discover very early on in life is leadership is maybe 5% knowledge of what leadership is, and 95% it's character. And you don't develop character by reading more and more books on leadership. You just get to know some interesting aspects. So I think leadership is something that's best experienced by observing people around you, experiencing tough situations, difficult situations, and figuring out what some leadership insights are for yourself. Second reason is, what the best leaders are never written about. For example, if you come to the story of India in the 21st century, story of V.S. Sudhakar, one of the co-founders at Big Basket, if his story is not written, then nothing is worth reading about. And he's, for example, nobody knows about him because level 5 leaders are very understated. Nobody really knows about them. Everybody talks about Mahatma Gandhi, Lincoln, Bajaj. I mean, they're all great characters, but for me, you know what, they are too remote. I can not learn too much from them. You know what is ultimately panegyric and what is really elements of luck that fell into their lives, their context. They're too remote and too above me. I feel best leadership lessons are learned by observing people around you. And for me, my role models since my childhood, I never said Lincoln was ever my role model. My role model would be always somebody who I admired working with very closely. So that's my take. So I read science, history, human psychology, human mind. You got my list already. And management and leadership, largely avoid them, excepting the rare exceptions. Where a book is about some very specific macro trend, or a book is about something which is about a bigger picture where you can't easily figure out. So somebody should have put together some amazing set of insights about a broader trend. So those kind of books I don't mind. I won't even classify them as management and leadership. So excepting for management and leadership, I'm open to all kinds of books.
Sure, fair point. I hear you on that, and I'd really like to take you up on this one. But before that, Shiv, would you want to comment on this one?
No,
Any
I
thoughts
I
that occur to you?
personally believe that very rarely do you get a book which you'll have 100 insights or 50 insights. The more books I have read, if I get 5 insights from a book, that's absolutely fantastic. That's one. Second is, while you can have the ability to watch leaders, you can read about people who had the ability to watch leaders. And that's where I'd classify Henry Kissinger's book. For example, I knew very little about Adenauer, even though I'd read about him. I have a book on my table right now on Adenauer, which I'd read about 6 months ago. But the Adenauer that Henry Kissinger, looks at from his eyes and from America eyes, and how he stood up to Russia, how he stood up to France, how he stood up to, Britain, and got Germany back onto the mainstream EU. The kind of things that he did was just amazing, and okay, you could argue whether Richard Nixon should be in that list, but everybody else in that list, Sadat, etc., and his relationship with Israel and what he did, I think just their narrative itself is a very powerful way to think about leadership. That's the way I see it.
Aparna, do any thoughts occur to you to the points that arguments that Hari's made?
Well, I have to say I don't necessarily read that many business books myself
Sure,
because I also have a sort of fairly eclectic selection.
right.
But I also have to say that I think that when you're looking for answers, I think they do provide guidance on some. If I have to look back at Shiv's list, I'm very the CEO Excellence book. I've actually bought a couple of copies for people because I think it's very interesting the way it's been structured and laid out, and like a lot of McKinsey reports. It might be stuff that you already know, but it's just been presented really well. I'm very curious to see the Daniel Coyle book, because I know his first book was very interesting, his earlier book rather, on culture. So I think that the some of the themes that Shiv highlighted in his article are interesting. So I definitely feel that, you know, these as sort of go-to resources, one should not dismiss them, because I think when you are looking up a particular topic, whatever aspect of business that is, they actually come in really handy.
Right, right. So it's actually interesting, Hari. It's actually quite interesting that you brought up some of these books. I mean, so for instance, the rereading. I think there's a book that Shiv had recommended some time ago. I don't quite recall which year it was in. It was 21 Letters to My Grandchildren by
Yeah,
Charles Handy.
correct.
Uh,
Great
I
book.
thought that was an absolutely outstanding book.
Fantastic book. Yeah.
It was by an 85-year-old. He was 85. He's 90 now, and I think I keep revisiting it all the time. And it's full of insights across the. So, like you
But
said,
even
I buy that. I buy
Charles,
the. Yeah.
in the same genre, while it has a management angle to it, I think Clayton Christensen, How Will You Measure Your Life? Okay, that's again a very deeply reflective book and a very thoughtful book. I know he's no more, but he wrote that a few years ago.
Yeah, that book changed my life,
Absolutely.
definitely. It's,
Yeah.
yeah, 100%.
Right. Hari, would something like that resonate with you? Would Clayton Christensen resonate
Yes,
with
I
you?
think Clayton Christensen's the book that is being referred to. I think I have read bits and pieces of that. I haven't read the whole book, will I read the whole book. But I think those bits and pieces were wonderful.
Okay.
So I think something like that is amazing.
Okay.
And the point is that reading a book, 300-page book,
Uh-huh.
completely is a tough ask because if you're busy, you have 100 other things to do. Yeah, I would rather read bits and pieces from multiple books rather than read complete books because even in a book, for example, Loon Shots, I was just reading recently by
Safi
Sefi
Bahikal's
Baikel.
Loon Shots.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was probably about 350 pages. I found 50 pages very insightful, but the remaining 250 pages or 300 pages was just a bit of repetition, stretching points. So sometimes books can become heavy. To find those 50 relevant pages from 350, you'll have to read probably the whole book. So yeah, for example, today I discovered a book. I was talking to somebody, 1001 Inventions That Changed the World. So those kind of books fascinate me more than individuals. No, parts of history and parts of science, are interesting. In the process, if I get to know about a few individuals, so be it. But I wouldn't pick a book, about an individual. I would pick a book about a period of history I would like to read. And in the process, if there are a few individuals who played a role in shaping the history at that time, that's wonderful. But fully one book about one individual to me is, I think, stretching a point and sometimes idolizing a person beyond, what is necessary. You miss the point because you try to look at the person as too much of a hero. And there are no heroes in this world. Everybody has played a role. Each of us is a hero. The little guy next to you, he's a hero. My daughter is my heroes. I don't do this hero worship. So I think, I like concepts. I like parts of history. I like elements of science, things which change the world. But in the process, if I get to know about a few individuals, it's awesome.
But
You
you
know,
also made the point,
sorry, I'm
Hari.
just gonna.
Aparna,
Yeah.
just give me a moment. But Hari, you also made the point that you would have loved it if something on Sudhakar of Big Basket was written, and it's a travesty that something a biography of him hasn't been done so far. That's a does that transgress your boundary of hero worship?
No, 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 no. So the point I was trying to make is that real leaders, nobody writes about them, and the real leaders do not want to be written about because they are so self-effacing. If you read the idea of a level 5 leader, the level 5 leader never wants anything written or talked about that individual. She would rather push the subject to the work that the person is doing and the impact that person is creating about the company, about the society at large, what change is being brought about, but would try and push the discussion away from self. So the best leaders are never written about. That's the point I was making. I was not saying the Sudhakar's biography needs to be written. I was just making a point that there are wonderful people whose stories are never written, and they are the best leaders. And we tend to, overdo certain individuals. There are hundreds of books on Narayan Murthy, hundreds of books on Ratan Tata. And are they the only leaders for me? I mean, I think sometimes being born at the right place, right time, having the right privileges, and saying the right things entitles you to a set of stories. But for me, those are not exciting. I don't find those frankly exciting.
Mm, well,
Aparna, you were saying something?
And very personal choice, Charles. I think by the way, I deeply respect Shiv and Aparna's choices, Shiv's choices of his books, and he's a very voracious reader. But it's just that all of us have different perspectives. I'm sharing what my
oh,
perspectives are.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Aparna, you were saying something, Aparna.
Yeah, there are a couple of points I want to make. One is that maybe Hari would be interested in a book called The Last Heroes, Sainath's new book, which talks about the foot soldiers of Indian freedom, which is all
I'm an
these.
absolute fan of Sainath. I'm an absolute fan. I love his writing. I read his book, Everyone Loves a Drought, when I was early on in my professional life. I was so touched and impressed. I wanted to give up, corporate career and do something more meaningful. That's the kind of admiration I have for him.
Yeah, so this new book is all about people who really like. So, for example, somebody who served all the soldiers in the army and didn't
I will
expect any
certainly
credit.
pick it up,
So
Pawan. I will
that
certainly pick it up.
yeah, that was one point. And there's also, I came across a quote by George Orwell, who said that autobiography is only to be trusted when it reveals something disgraceful. A man
Yes,
who gives a
yes,
good account of himself is probably lying, since any life,
absolutely.
when viewed from the inside, is simply a series of defeats. So I just thought that was interesting,
Wonderful.
I'll
in the conversation
I'll
that
give
we're having.
you another angle on this, Charles. One of the guys I really love reading is Walter Isaacson. Okay,
Oh yeah,
he's
okay.
written
Hmm.
some of the finest books on individuals, like Steve Jobs, like Leonardo da Vinci, like The Code Breaker on Jennifer Doudou, okay, and Benjamin Franklin. He doesn't hero worship any of them. He had access to all the information that he wanted. He takes 2 3 years to write a book. He writes a tome virtually, 1,000 pages, etc. And he doesn't hero worship anybody, but he gives you a very good, picture of the person right from start to finish. Okay, I've always enjoyed Walter Isaacson's book because for exactly the
Yeah, yeah,
same
yeah,
reason.
absolutely. I totally agree. There are obviously some very good biographies, even Irving Stone's biography of Michelangelo, or even a few other biographies written, very high quality biographies, and none of them do hero worship. They're very balanced accounts. I totally agree on that.
Yeah, in fact, I thought Walter Isaacson's last one was
The,
absolutely brilliant.
the Code Breaker on Jennifer Doudou.
The Code Breaker on Jennifer Doudna. Yeah, I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and the amount of light it threw on
Yeah,
the pen, on the
on the
virus, and
technology
how
and her.
on the technology and the understanding it offered was like this. Absolutely, it took it to a different level altogether, and actually started to appreciate really, what is going on. That was absolutely uh, totally. So, just to move the needle a little bit on this conversation, Aparna, there was something you had shared, when we were exchanging texts, and I wonder what I'm really curious to hear about this. You had an observation to make. You made the point that you are listening into multiple conversations and narratives, and there are things that you are picking up, and you'd like to surface that. And I wonder what may Shiv and Hari have to say to that.
Yeah, so this was in the context of the column that I write, which is called Head Office in the Mint, where I interview CEOs and increasingly a lot of founders, and ask them to, I really explore the connection between workplaces and work styles. So the companies that I looked at were pretty diverse this year, everything from a Dream 11 and a boat to, to a small software products company called Atlan to a Deloitte. So they varied a lot, but two or three themes emerged, and it was interesting for me to see how many of those themes emerged in Shiv's list also. So I think the idea, first of all, of purpose as being a big driver for organizations is something that has been around for a while. It's not new, but it was there in, I think, some of the selections in his list. So it was interesting to see that, because CEOs continue to bring that up as something that motivates them, or at least they like talking to journalists about it. Now, we can decide whether they actually do it or whether they like talking to journalists about it. But it's certainly a topic for conversation. The whole idea of, especially since I look at workplaces and through this leadership through the lens of the workplace, this whole idea of going back to work, what kind of organization, and what the new, the future of work is really going to look like, was obviously something that came up a lot. And it was interesting to see that Shiv has had this on his list both last year and this year. So I think this is something that is increasingly a strategic decision and not just necessarily just an HR decision. It's something that is on the CEO agenda. The thing that has appeared a lot in the conversation, and I would, I would wonder if it's because I have an interest in mental health, but I think it's not just because of that. I think it's genuinely coming onto the radar is this whole idea of mental health and empathy, which really appeared in very different ways, whether it was empathy with farmers for a company like Dehat, or whether it was empathy with weavers for a company like Jaipur Rugs, or empathy amongst the workforce for Puneet Ranjan, who just brought it up, and mental health being a big one. So that's what I would love to see on Shiv's list next year, assuming titles like that are in, get written about. That would be my wish list. And the other thing, of course, good books on design and business. I would always love to see that on his list also. He has a title by Roger Martin, who's done a lot of work on design in the past and has written books around this too. So it'd be good to just see, if there's any new thinking on what design and business can do together, or if maybe this is something that's a fad that's come and gone actually. But I'd be curious to know what both Shiv and Hari have to say about that.
Shiv, Hari,
Hari, you want
been
to go first?
hearing,
Then I'll chip in.
and I can see some friends there.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'll just say that, you know what, from time to time, different themes come up. They last for a while, they disappear. Mental health during the pandemic, I think, was at its peak. The topic was being discussed everywhere. Everybody was talking about it. I'm not really sure how many deeply understood how important it was and what specific things need to be done in response. Meaning and purpose suddenly seems to have taken front stage. I would say that things like meaning and purpose, companies that build based on meaning and purpose have done that in the past, will continue to do so. Companies that don't care for meaning and purpose, existed in the past, will continue to exist in the future. I am not sure whether any of these are defining changes in the way companies are built and run. I think companies will be built and run for reasons that existed in the past, will continue to be built and run for the reasons that continue to exist as well. And there will be people from different backgrounds, different mindsets who will build and run companies differently. And I think Aparna also said, somewhere that maybe these are nice things to talk about to a journalist, meaning and purpose and all of that, very few of us actually real meaning and purpose in life. Even after 50, we've hardly discovered what's the meaning and purpose of our life. We struggle with that. In fact, when I have talked about it, I said, forget meaning and purpose, get a little self-aware, understand yourself deeply first, because from there comes, meaning and purpose. So I think some of these are fads, some of these are real changes. And I'm honestly not able to make out, I'm not at a vantage point, for instance, to actually say with a degree of confidence that some changes are systemic and secular. I am unable to just say that.
Yeah. So if I were to add to that, yes, issues like mental health, etc. So when I actually reviewed your book, Aparna, I said it's a rare book, and almost everybody echoed with that, etc. Okay. So yes, I'm sure that there will be many more books which will come through, and then something which is of use to society or provide society a different point of view is always, something that I would look for and pick. But on your issue of purpose, I agree with you that, and I might be making a provocative statement. I think 90% of CEOs don't know what they're talking about. And I must be very blunt and honest with you. They have no clue. Okay. Nobody goes and
That's
buys
a
a
very
lot saying,
strong
I like
statement
the
to make,
purpose.
Shiv.
What did you say?
That's a very strong statement to make.
Yes,
90%
I've
of
said this
CEOs don't
before.
know
So
what they're
that's why
saying.
I've thought about this a lot and deeply, and I'll explain to you why I say this. For example, nobody goes to an outlet and says, you know what? I'm going to buy a Nokia because it has a purpose. No, it fills a need. If you fill the need better than anybody else, you will be bought if you are competitive. So this purpose, etc., is in my book, a lot of it is good copy. It's nice to say. Let me explain how the concept of purpose itself came about. If you go back 200, 300 years ago, Lord Leverhulme set up something in sunlight. Okay, Procter and Gamble set up something in Cincinnati. The Bajaj set up something in Warda. Okay, the Goenkas and the Birla set up something in Calcutta. When these old entrepreneurs 200 years ago set up something, they suddenly realized, hey, you know what? We need educated people. They started a school. They said, you know what? People want a temple. They built a temple. They built the whole township in and around the needs of the people there. And that's why they had high license to operate in that society. Their purpose was to serve the society so that society could be a part of their, whatever you want to call it, direction, etc. That's where the concept of purpose started. Okay, now you look at purpose, you choose 10 words, world, people, millennials, okay, difference, innovation, change. Okay, and I can string, 10 sentences which can apply for any company. So I think a lot of people are just doing this sort of compulsion to say something about it. I don't think their actions or everything around that truly mean it. Okay, that's my personal view.
Right, right. Hey, Kuku, Mandar, hi. I can see some friends out there. You guys want to ask something of Hari, Aparna, Shiv? Just raise a hand. I'll just get you up, get you guys up out here. Um, sorry about that. Yeah. Thanks for that. That's an interesting observation,
I'll
if
also
I
give
hadn't
you
occurred to.
the other side of it. I think today the demands on a company or on a leader or anybody are far higher than ever before in life. Okay, so let's take Google. Want to organize the world's information. That's where the general direction started. They didn't call it purpose, they didn't call it anything. But today they're held accountable for democracy, which was never as part of their agenda ever in their life. So they can't operate in China. So it's a much more complex thing than just putting 20 words and having a 1 hour tea with Aparna and telling her what they think is purpose.
Yeah, I tend to largely agree with this approach, which is that, you need to get your strategy, you need to get, the customers that you're serving, what problem you're solving, those aspects right, and build a company ethically. So I think somewhere purpose and ethics are getting also mixed up. So I don't really know whether you need to have a deep sense of purpose as long as you're building a company ethically, solving a real problem, understanding your customers well. I think that's good enough for me.
Charles, may I speak now?
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure,
I'll
Mandar.
give you one more example, just before you come in. My apologies. Let's take Nirma, one of the biggest success stories out of India. Okay, Karsan Bhai didn't go out there and say, I will serve the bottom of the pyramid. He never said that. CK Prahlad came with bottom of the pyramid in 2000. This thing, Karsan Bhai came with Nirma in 1980s. Now you can force fit any purpose, you can force fit anything backwards, looking back. That's what I would say. Yeah, please go ahead.
Shiv, firstly, I read your, was it 20 slides or something that was sent in the Founding Fuel message? So it's a great honor to connect with you. My name is Mandar Apte. I spent about 20 years working for a small oil company called Shell.
It's not small by
Within
any
Shell,
means.
the universe is big. So that's the humbling aspect of the lives we live. While at Shell, I was in a very interesting program, outward facing do tank called Game Changer, that looked at experiments to, of course, make money for Shell, but invest in failure. So, through my experience, this word purpose that became such a sexy word 2 years ago in America and caught on everywhere, people forget that purpose is not a destination. It is a journey, and that journey has, detours and pit stops and trials and errors. And sometimes people forget this aspect of purpose. Like, purpose is not just one, two, three is my purpose. And my second, the question I have for you is my mission now over the last 5 years is having been a student of yoga meditation for last 20 years. I'm trying to integrate the Indic approach of the meaning of life into this quest of purpose that leaders usually have you come across such integration where uh, you allow that internal quest of who am I and what is the purpose of my life to integrate with what is the purpose of the outward actions that I take through my organizations and leadership, because that is the access to the intuitive space. Like not every decision can be made logically, especially today in the connected world, and that access to the right brain, the access to that intuitive gut feeling can also make a step change in the orbit of a leader. So have you like thought about this? I'm assuming you have.
Yeah, I've thought about it and I've read a lot about it. See, these are very deeply personal choices that one makes. You can use any set of words. The
Hmm.
simplest word I would use in terms of individual purpose, what do I want to do, etc., is ask yourself what contribution you want to make. Some people
Hmm.
might want to make contribution in X area, Y area, etc. And the biggest thing we as professionals at least can give, as opposed to entrepreneurs or legacy companies, is we can give our time. Okay. So if I believe I've contributed to somebody's life, to an organization, some way or the other by giving my time and making things better, I'm okay with it.
Hmm.
That's the way I see
Just wanted to add to this. I think the idea of purpose has suddenly become very important because people are stuck in boring jobs and they're forced to make a living doing things that they don't really enjoy doing or don't really like. So when that happens, I think you need to look for fulfillment outside of your work. And then you need to begin to ask yourself questions like, what's the purpose of my life? But if you're enjoying what you're doing, if you're fortunate enough to be able to do what you like every day, then that's clearly the purpose itself. So I think purpose becomes more and more strong if you are stuck in doing things that you don't really like just out of necessity or just out of economic compulsions.
Hmm.
it. No, that's one. I think there's another very important angle, which is the idea of a corporation as a living entity is no longer true in anybody's mind. In 1935, the average age of a company was 90 years. In
Hmm.
1960, the average age of a company was 60. And in 2020 or 22, the average age of a company is less than 15 years. So, whom do you stay with? Who gives you meaning? And the whole concept of, it's become an exchange now, it's transaction. Okay.
Hmm.
It's no longer that I stay with the company will take care of me. Those days are over. You have to take care of yourself. Your boss can't take care of you. Your company cannot take care of you. Your HR department cannot take care of you. So I think people have come to that conclusion. So in coming to that conclusion, they say, okay, what should I look for now? Is there something out there which is meaningful? So that's what's happening out
So this offers me a segue to ask a question. Because there is one book which occurs on Shiv's list, which is "The Earned Life" by Marshall Goldsmith, and that is on my bookshelf. And I read it, and I enjoyed it. And a criticism that I have come across uh, is that the Indian, I quote unquote, the Indian fascination with Marshall Goldsmith is exaggerated or overrated. Is this something that you would buy, Shiv? I know of people in the C-suite who swear by him. And I know you have made this recommendation, and after you've done with, I don't know, Hari, if you may have some thoughts on this one.
there. Yeah, I think that's a fair observation, I must say. And this is very important, what I'm going to say, especially for authors like Aparna and anybody else on the call, Hari or Charles or whatever it is, which is the challenge with writing books is that it becomes a drug where you want to keep churning out stuff. And sometimes when
Hmm.
you churn out stuff, you might not give it your deepest valid thought. Okay, so I've read How Women Rise by Goldsmith. That was a very nice book in terms of how should women look at their careers, because that was a hot topic in 2019-20. The Earned Life is also a good book, but I think the criticism could be valid. I would buy that. Yeah.
Hari, any thoughts occur to you? And particularly because, I mean, this is a theme that you are close to, executive coaching, and particularly because you understand the
Sorry, Charles,
function
I
very
just missed
closely.
that question when you were asking Shiv. Can you just repeat that question for me very in brief?
There's a book that occurs on Shiv's list, which is The Earned Life by, the executive coach Marshall Goldsmith.
Right, right.
The book particularly appealed to me, and I personally enjoyed it. But I've come across this criticism that this the fascination with Goldsmith is kind of exaggerated. So I was just wondering, what
I
may
think
your thoughts?
fascination with any individual is always bound to get exaggerated. So that's the reason why I'm a bit reluctant, to about some of these populist heroes. In fact, some of the most popular books, if you read, are I don't want to take those names. It's not fair for me to do that. So I might agree that what we tend to lionize our heroes a little too much, as a result of which which is not necessarily right. And one my colleague Deblina Majumdar keeps pointing this out to me from time to time, which is that the best leadership book lessons can be learned by reading books outside of leadership, which don't purport to teach you coaching and to teach you leadership. The best lessons of leadership are learned from those books, from history. There's so many wonderful lessons in the process. You learn history, you learn leadership. I don't think you need to read a book on leadership by anybody to understand and know leadership. Leadership is not learned by reading, books which explicitly, aim to teach you leadership.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, Hari. I just want to push back a little, if that's okay,
Oh
Charles.
yeah, absolutely.
Because,
Please do. In fact,
yeah.
I think Hari actually, needs to be pushed back. Otherwise, Hari will, be
Charles told
bouncing
me,
all
why
over
don't
us.
you?
No,
Hari,
because the thing is, not everyone loves history. I mean, I think there are people who can read 700 pages of Lincoln and just absorb that, and also extrapolate from that and make the connections to how it
Correct,
could be
correct.
relevant to life. But not everyone can do that, and I
I
think that
totally agree. Totally
that
agree.
that the frameworks that modern management writers and thinkers present, those frameworks, those case studies, those examples,
I
those
do that
things.
myself. Say
Yeah,
last 7 years, I did
And
so many
Hari, the
books
other thing I want
myself.
to really push
Yeah.
back on is that we really don't have enough books coming out of India, and or from the global South in general. I would say, we're still, if I'm sure all of you as big readers would know that most of the books, especially in English, in non-fiction that are being sold, are all by the West. Like by the vast
In
majority.
my
We're talking
list, Aparna,
70.
in my list of 10 books, there was not one from the West, excepting by Gary Kasparov. Every other book that I talked about was written by an Indian,
Yeah,
published in India. The thought leadership came from India. None of my books were of a foreigner.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I
No,
completely understand. I also realize the quality of books that are coming out are absolutely amazing. So it reflects in my choice of books. So I think there is proof that I believe in that because I chose those
but
books.
isn't Shankar
And I
Vedantam
agree with you
based in
that
the West? The Hidden Brain.
Hidden Brain, I think he's worked in the West significantly. I know that. But otherwise, he was born and brought up in India and he worked in the West. But everybody else, for example, whether it was a Pranay Lal, Deblina Majumdar, Uday Kulkarni, I talked about, all of those,
Yeah,
they're all
Pranay Lal
from.
as well. I mean, isn't he also currently based out of the West currently? Hasn't he moved out of
No, no,
India?
no, no. I know him well. We met recently. He's not based on the West. He's thinking of doing something on climate change and doing something really big. So he shuttles now between different parts of the world.
Okay, okay.
And I agree with Aparna. I'm, for example, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of these management books simplify concepts in a manner that everybody can understand. But the point is that I am not a fan of those books. That's it. There are a big set of people who benefit by reading those books. I completely agree on that.
So to Aparna's point, on good books coming out of our part of the world, and Shiv, this is something I'm first. I was very miffed with you actually on this one. Chip Wars by Chris Miller. it did not make it to your list. I was quite surprised that it did not make it to your list, because there's so much happening in the semiconductor business and chips, and the book was out as early as in October. And given your background, I was reasonably sure. I was actually willing to bet that it'll make it to the list. Whatever happened? Why didn't it make it to the
No,
list is one
there are many
question. And
books.
of course, and why? And second thing is, why isn't it that someone from this part of the world didn't come up with that book?
Yeah, both good challenges. The thing is, yeah, it didn't make it because, see, I always look at it at an absolute level all the time. And when I make the list and you guys push me hard on that for a month or so, I really look at it from my reader's point of view also to see, okay, what would help the reader also in terms of what are the. I'll be the first guy to tell you that I read a lot of junk also. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff which I read which
There's
I don't
nothing like
even
a good
summarize.
Jeffrey Archer, eh?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't even summarize those books because there are some books which are very difficult to summarize. But going back to the concept, I'm just reading and I have it in my hand. It's a fantastic book called The BBC: A People's History by David Hendy. Okay, this is about everything you want to learn. How do you set up a new technology called telegraph? Three fellows get together and start the BBC. Okay, now what all did they go through? How did they have to build their programs? How did they have to sell it? So any new technology which comes into the world, how do you write that? It's a fantastic lesson in itself. And that quality of data and detail, I don't find often in many books.
Right, right, sure. Ram, you're on mute on the Founding Fuel handle, and we're pretty close to 8. Is there something playing on your mind that you would like to ask Shiv, Hari, and Aparna?
Thanks, Charles. Shiv, one question I had was there any book that you wanted to include but didn't, which almost made it to the list,
Oh,
but you didn't? Yeah.
there are many of them.
And what was probably can you talk about one or two,
No, no,
and also tell why they didn't make it to the
no,
list?
there are many of them because when you go through, 50, 100 books, there are many which don't make it. And I always believe that they must have a point of view which make you think differently. That's, a judge, of a good book for me. So so many of the books which dropped off. There are many books which have been written by various guys in the West, in India, etc. All kinds of stuff, and they just didn't make it in my book in terms of saying, that's a book which is surprising. That's a book which was a completely different point of view. That's a good thing. For example, the first one by Martin is actually a very good book if you want to rethink strategy. Now, there have been 100 books on strategy, like getting your strategy clear and right is one of the things I've just read last month. It certainly didn't make it because when I stack up that strategy book vis-a-vis a new way to think is streets ahead. Okay, not ordinary distance. So I read a lot of strategy books. So I must have read, 10, 15 strategy books. But this is the book which stood out a lot. Similarly, on CEOs and how they perform, there are hundreds of Indian books which have been written on CEOs. There have been hundreds of books written globally on CEOs again. But that CEO Excellence book by McKinsey, halfway through the book, I felt it wasn't hot. But as I finished the book, I thought that they had some good points. Okay, and that's why I placed it higher than all the other CEO books that I'd read. So like that, it's a process of trial and error. And my thing is what Hari said in the beginning also. Do I go back to revisit the book to refresh my own thinking and my own maybe speaking engagements? The more I tend to do that, the more I realize why the book is very good.
Right. Hari, Aparna, any recommendations, your recommendations that I know both of you have already spoken about the books that have gotten your attention, but absolute must reads that you reckon we must be looking at. Would you like to go first, Aparna? I think Aparna's on mute. If you are
She
speaking,
dropped
Aparna.
out.
Oh, is it? Okay.
So yeah,
Sorry,
I'm
sorry,
not sure.
sorry. I was on mute. Sorry. No, so I was saying that we mentioned before, but how will you measure your life? For me, is not necessarily a new book, but a book by Clayton Christensen that I think is something which really allows people to understand what they want to do with their life, but also presents a toolkit for that. It's very useful and it's very well thought of, and I think a really compelling read from that one. So that would be what I would suggest.
Okay. And Hari, if you were to,
Yeah, so I think I can only just say what book I really loved reading. It's unfair for me to make a recommendation and say that it's a must read because people's choices are very
oh yeah,
different.
absolutely.
I loved reading Indica. So that was my favorite book. And for me, you know what, if I love a movie or if I love a book, I keep going back to that again and again. And when I read a book multiple times, watch a movie multiple times, to me, it's clearly an indication that I've thoroughly loved it. So Indica is one book I've read. I don't know, I've lost count of the number of times I've read it, not just the whole book, but in bits and pieces. So Indica by Pranay Lal for me was the book of the year.
Okay. I must say I'm among the privileged ones who I've got a signed copy of Indica by Pranay.
Mhm.
So it's one of my cherished possessions. And we're pretty much running out of time. So Shiv, I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah,
Shiv,
so I'll tell
because
you
we
a book I
yeah
wish had been written well. I'm a great Roger Federer fan. Okay, Roger
okay.
Federer, timing, great, Lever Cup, retired, etc.
He's my
Every book which
hero.
has
He's
been
my
written
hero.
about
You
him has
can't
been,
say
been
anything bad about him.
every book which has been written about him has been rubbish so far. There's not one book. In fact, the Trevor Noah show, and please do see it, the Trevor Noah Daily Show. He's just interviewed Roger, I think 2-3 days ago. It's a fabulous 22-minute show between the two of them. That captures Roger and what he is much better than all the rubbish books. I really wish somebody could write a great book on Roger Federer.
Uh, when he walked off center court for the last time, I think I thought I almost cried.
Yes, that's true. Great. I really wish somebody does a great book of Federer. I think there's a lot to learn from him. Yeah.
One of the greatest sports persons ever.
Yeah.
Ever. Absolutely. Absolutely. He's my hero.
Yeah, that's a book I'd love to read. Let's hope something is on the way. I don't know.
Well, let's really hope so. Well, thank you so much, Hari,
Pleasure, guys.
Aparna, Shiv. Such a pleasure talking to you. Been lovely.
Pleasure. Thank you,
Thank you.
founding member.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Aparna. Thank you, Hari, and everybody on the call.
Thank you.
Absolute great stuff doing
Yeah.
this. My pleasure.